Ricky.
Okay, good afternoon. And we are now in August. And I'm going to ask you a question. If you remember, where were you 50 years ago when this guy ended his presidency? 50 years ago. I was in Toronto. So, but you don't remember where you were when you heard Nixon was quitting? I was in Toronto. Where were you?
I was in Poland.
You were in Poland.
Yes.
So you were out of the country like me.
Right.
So, anyway, it is the 50th anniversary of this guy. He is the only one to resign as President of the United States. Johnson didn't really quit on March 31st, 1968, nor did Biden. They're going to finish out, or he's going to finish out his term, but he didn't, and he was replaced by Gerald Ford. Patty Hearst, how many of you remember Patty Hearst?
Patty Hearst.
Patty Hearst, yeah, Symbionese Liberation Army. How many of you remember the gas crisis, where you had to go get gas, and depending on what your license plate was? How many of you go to the supermarket and use a barcode? You use a barcode. All you do is put the thing over the eye. The first barcode was in 1974. Haile Selassie is overthrown in Ethiopia. Willy Brandt is out in West Germany as the chancellor. There's another revolution in Portugal, but we're going to talk about my old buddy Dick Nixon. Okay, I am going to now tell you the story about me and Richard Nixon, or as he used to say.
Would you use the microphone, please?
Yeah, or as he used to say, please, hello, there you go. Please call me Dick. Evan, please call me Dick. I met Richard Nixon in 1985. He was the arbitrator of the Major League Baseball owners, Major League Baseball umpires dispute. And this is how I met him. Neither side, the owners or the umpires, were getting anywhere in their negotiations for a new contract. A guy by the name of Richie Phillips, who recently passed away, was the head of the Umpires Association, and he's getting frustrated. All of a sudden, he calls Peter Ueberroth, who is the commissioner of baseball, and says, have you ever thought that maybe, just maybe, we should try arbitration? And Richie Phillips, and Ueberroth asked Richie Phillips, well, who do you have in mind? He said, Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon, get out of here. What do you mean, Dick Nixon? Well, he said, Ueberroth said to Richie, how do you know him? Well, he's next door. All I have to do is go next door. Next door? Well, yeah, you see, his daughter, Julie, was living with her husband David, and they were living in Society Hill off the main line in Philadelphia, and Richard Nixon was the babysitter every weekend. Can you imagine Richard Nixon babysitting little kids? Let me make this perfectly clear. If you don't do that, you will not get dinner tonight. You will go up to your room, and I will force you to listen to Henry Kissinger. So anyway, so Richie goes next door. Hey, you want to be the arbitrator? Yeah. So Richie's okay with it. Eventually, Peter is okay with it. And then I get a phone call. It's from Gene Orza, who's the head of the Major League Baseball. He's the assistant head of the Major League Baseball Players Association. He said, what you doing today? I said, nothing until tonight. He said, how'd you like to go interview Dick Nixon? I said, what? Get out of here. He said, no. He's the arbitrator now in the umpires dispute with the owners. And we're going down there as Players Association. You work for Westwood One, in those days, Mutual Radio. Come on down. So I go down there. I meet Don Fear, who's the executive director of the Players Association, and Gene Orza, and Bruce Morton's with me. And we go upstairs. And the secretary said, oh, you're here for the baseball thing. Yes, we are. She said, Mr. Nixon is not here, but you can wait in his office. So we go into the office, which was a miniature oval office. He had the copy of the Resolute desk, but on the wall, he had pictures from, say, there to the end of the bingo thing over there. And it's pictures of him with Sadat, and him with Golda Meir, and him with Mao Zedong, and him with Brezhnev, all these people, and he had flags all over the place. And so we're sitting there, and I'm looking at the chair behind his desk. I'm looking at that chair. And I only wish, in 1985, I had this technology. None of us had cameras, but all of us did the same thing, which I will show you right now. We all plopped in his desk, behind his desk, into the chair, and we did this. I'm not a crook. I am not a crook. So, no, he wasn't a crook. But I got to know, at least on the periphery, Dick Nixon a little bit. And I also got to know Larry O'Brien. He was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. And he was the target of the Watergate break-in. So here's Nixon. And there has never been a more appropriate name for a re-election campaign by the president than CREEP. C-R-E-E-P, CREEP. The committee to re-elect the president of the United States. CREEP. Yeah, you could describe Nixon that way. By the way, one day I saw Nixon, and I said, good afternoon, Mr. President. And he looked at me, and he knew my name, which is amazing. Evan, no, please call me Dick. Dick, call me Dick. And ever since then, I've called him Dick Nixon. Anyway, the 1972 election. The Vietnam War continued. The American economy was a mess. In the 1970 midterms, the Democrats won the popular vote in races by 8.7%, and the House and adding a dozen seats. In 1971, Nixon's approval rating dropped under 50%. It's the only presidential autograph I have. I'll tell you a story about this. I brought an index card. And I said, can you sign the index card? Yeah, he does. And he puts it on the table. And he takes out a ruler. And he lines the card up with the table, lines the ruler up with the table, and signs his name above the edge of the ruler. You can see, this is straight. It's totally straight. He moved the ruler and then just finished off the X. Rather strange, isn't it? It's a weird thing. But anyway, call me Dick. Oh, I did. And Larry O'Brien, he was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association from about 1976 to about 1984, and I got to know him a little bit around 1981, 1982. I'm going to give you a little story about Larry O'Brien. He was one of the advisors for John F. Kennedy. And it is November 22nd, 1963. And the story he told was told to Mark Schneider, who told it to me. And it's very early in the morning in Fort Worth, and John Kennedy can't sleep. So he calls Larry O'Brien. He says, let's take a walk. Well, where are you going to walk when you're the president? Well, you can go up to the roof, and that's where they went with the Secret Service. And Kennedy is walking around, and he looks at Larry, and he says, you know, Larry, it's a great big world out there. And if somebody's going to get me, they're going to get me. And about 8 hours later, they got him. O'Brien also worked with Lyndon Johnson. He was his liaison to Congress, and he was hired after the Watergate break-in by the National Basketball Association to get a merger with the American Basketball Association. I said, why'd they break in? He said, because they thought I knew something. This is G. Gordon Liddy. G. Gordon Liddy. My business took care of him after he did jail time on radio. In January 1972, G. Gordon Liddy, General Counsel to the Committee for the Re-election of the President, or CREEP, proposes burglarizing and wiretapping the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. This guy's the lawyer. And he says, why don't we bug him? It's illegal. You can't do that. But he's a lawyer, you know? So, hey, I'm a lawyer. I can do whatever I want. Just look at other people that have been lawyers. And they are basically bugging his office, Larry O'Brien. On May 17, 1972, wiretaps are placed on the telephones of the Democratic National Committee Chairman, Larry O'Brien, and the Executive Director of the Democratic States Chairman, R. Spencer Oliver, Jr. On June 17, 1972, Frank Wilkes Willis rather, no, Frank Willis, security guard at the Watergate complex, called the police at 1:30 in the morning. 5 men were arrested inside the Democratic National Committee's headquarters office, which was at the Watergate. On June 18, 1972, Virgilio Gonzalez, Bernard Barker, James W. McCourt, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis are charged with an attempted burglary and attempted interception of telephone and other communications. Well, there are 2 guys who are working at the Washington Post. Neither one of them has much power at the Washington Post. Carl Bernstein was my type of guy. He was out in the streets, and he knew how to work the streets. Bob Woodward was not my type of guy. He went to school, and he sweated over dotting every I or every T while Bernstein threw bombs. And that's how you're supposed to be as a journalist. The real heroes in the Watergate story are not these 2 guys. The real heroes are Ben Bradlee, who is the editor of the Washington Post, and Katherine Graham, who was the publisher of the Washington Post. They went with the story. And it became a huge story. Probably couldn't be replicated today. On June 19, 1972, the Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward revealed that one of the Watergate burglars, James McCord, was a Republican Party security aide, and that is McCord. In June and July, a Woodward-Bernstein source, Deep Throat, who turned out to be Mark Felt, reveals that an examination of the burglar's accounts showed the link to the 1972 CREEP, Committee to Re-elect the President, through its subordinate Financial Committee. Well, the election comes and goes. It's Richard Nixon against George McGovern. And Nixon cleans his clock, absolutely cleans his clock. The campaign, this guy had no personality. He was totally devoid of personality, and yet he won 2 presidential races. Totally devoid of personality. But in those days, they used to talk about issues. Today, it's all about personality and all that other stuff, because the media needs to sell its product, and they figure people want to see personality. On August 29th, 1972, Dick Nixon, speaking at a news conference, stated, "I can say categorically that no one in the White House staff, no one in this administration presently employed was involved in this very bizarre incident. Call me Dick." Only a mother could love that face. Only a mother could love that face. I knew him. On August 30th, 1972, Nixon announces that White House counsel John Dean completed an internal investigation into the Watergate break-in, and guess what? It wasn't us! It wasn't us! Well then, who was it? It wasn't us. We know nothing about it. The White House is not involved. And you know what Bernstein and Woodward look like today, 50 years later. Carl Bernstein had the haircut then. His hair is all back this way these days. On September 29, 1972, the Washington Post reports that Nixon's former Attorney General, John Mitchell, once controlled a secret fund to finance intelligence gathering against Democrats. When Carl Bernstein, told you he liked to throw the bombs, when Carl Bernstein calls Mitchell for a comment, Mitchell threatens both Bernstein and Katherine Graham, the publisher of the Post. The Post printed that threat. You wouldn't see that today. That's how different the coverage is today. The guy who Nixon was most worried about was this guy, Edmund Muskie. He ran for vice president under Hubert Humphrey in 1968 when Nixon and Agnew won, and they decided this was the guy they wanted to go after. In October 1972, Woodward and Bernstein report that the FBI had made connections between Nixon's aides and the Watergate break-in. Woodward and Bernstein described the existence of major dirty tricks campaign conducted against the Democratic presidential candidate Edmund Muskie, orchestrated by Donald Segretti and others paid by CREEP and one of Nixon's private attorneys. On November 7, 1972, Nixon is elected to a second term after defeating George McGovern. What I never understood about this is let me make this perfectly clear. Let me say this about that. McGovern actually flew missions in World War II, and Nixon didn't. He's more of a war hero than Nixon from World War II, and yet Nixon's this tough guy on war, and McGovern is this peacenik dove. That's how the roles played out. Nixon won 49 of 50 states, got 520 electoral votes, 61% of the popular vote, beating McGovern by nearly 18 million votes. But there are storm clouds brewing, and there would be trouble ahead in 1973. The plumbers. They are the plumbers, recorded there. On January 8, 1973, the Watergate burglary begins. Oh, why were they called the plumbers? Because they fix leaks, or they spring leaks. 5 defendants plead guilty. Liddy and McCourt are convicted after trial. And here's another guy. The acting FBI director, L. Patrick Gray. Another guy, another law enforcement guy who somehow breaks the law. A lot of those around. An awful lot of those around, particularly in Washington. On February 28, 1973, acting FBI Director L. Patrick Gray testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee during his nomination to replace J. Edgar Hoover as the director of the FBI. Armed with newspaper articles indicating the White House had possession of FBI Watergate files, the committee chairman, the Democrat from North Carolina, Sam Ervin, questioned Gray as to whether he knew about the White House obtaining the files. Well, kind of. Gray said that, yeah, I gave my FBI reports to John Dean and had discussed the FBI investigation with Dean on many occasions. It also came out that Gray had destroyed important evidence entrusted to him by Dean. This is the guy who's supposed to be the head of the FBI committing crimes. Gray's nomination failed, and Dean was directly linked to the Watergate cover-up. And there is James McCourt, and he's not happy he's going to prison. On March 19, 1973, in a letter to Judge John J. Sirica, who was a Republican, McCourt says that the defendants had been pressured to plead guilty and remain silent, and that perjury was committed and that others were involved, like John Dean. McCourt stated his plea, stated that his plea and testimony were compelled by pressure from the White House counsel, John Dean, who's on CNN now, talking about matters of the day, and former Attorney General John N. Mitchell. And there's G. Gordon Liddy. On March 23rd, 1973, 5 Watergate burglars, along with Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, were sentenced with stiff fines and maximum prison term of up to 40 years. They did not serve 40 years. Liddy became a TV and radio personality. So Dick Nixon says to John Dean, John, why don't we go up to Camp David? You know, David's my son-in-law. And we'll go up there and, you know, maybe we'll watch a basketball game in our underwear, you know, we can scratch ourselves, nobody will know. So John Dean says, yeah, sounds like a good idea. Why not? On March 22nd, 1973, Nixon requested that John Dean put together a report with everything he knew about the Watergate matter and invited him to the retreat at Camp David, which is in Maryland, named after his son-in-law, David Eisenhower. Dean goes up to Camp David and he starts working on the report, and then the light bulb goes on. Holy, this is me. I did all this. I'm going to jail. I can't do this. I can't do this at all. He was one of the cover-up's chief participants. The task placed him in a difficult position of relating his own involvement as well as others. Dean concluded he was being fitted for the role of scapegoat by the higher-ups. Needless to say, John Dean never finished the report. And here is John Dean, back in the day. He's now in his 80s. On April 6, 1973, Dean decides this is stuff. This is stuff that we have to deal with. So on April 6, 1973, he hires a lawyer and he begins his cooperation with the Senate Watergate investigators, while continuing to work as Nixon's chief White House counsel. He's doing both and participating in the cover-up efforts, not disclosing this to Dick Nixon until some time later. Dean continued to provide information to the prosecutors, who were able to make enormous progress on the cover-up, which up until then they had ignored, having concentrating on the actual burglary and the events preceding it. Well, it's time for a bloodletting in the White House. And this guy, H.R. Haldeman, and this guy, John Ehrlichman, they're going to get the axe. Dean had asked Nixon, hey, listen, I helped you here. Give me some immunity. Keep me out of jail. No, John, I'm not doing that. He refused to grant this request, and his refusal hits Dean in the eyes and says, why am I cooperating with Nixon? Why am I doing this? I'm going to jail. So let me go talk to the prosecutors, and maybe I can cut a deal. And there again is John Dean. Dean served notice on April 19, 1973 that he would not become the scapegoat for the Watergate scandal. Word was also passed by associates of Dean that he was ready to implicate Ehrlichman and Haldeman in the case. Please call me. Please call me. On April 30th, 1973, the White House announces the resignation of the Attorney General, Richard Kleindienst, and presidential aides, John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman, and they fire John Dean. And John Dean knows he's up the creek without a paddle. Nixon, after accepting the resignations of 3 of his closest aides and firing Dean, said, that's my fault. Let's get on with it. It's my fault. No, he never took responsibility, never wanted to. So Dean decides, you know what? I solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And that couldn't make Dick Nixon very happy. On June 25th, 1973, Dean began his testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee. The committee had voted to grant him use immunity. In his testimony, he implicated administration officers and officials, including the former Attorney General John Dean and Nixon and himself. Simple tape recorder. In my business in radio, I didn't have such a fancy tape recorder. That's a simple tape recorder. And this thing would lead to the beginning of the end of Dick Nixon as President of the United States. On June 25th, 1973, Dean began his testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee. The committee had voted to him grant immunity. And other things are going on. February 1971, a sound-activated taping system was installed in the Oval Office, including Nixon's Oval Office desk, to capture audio transmitted by telephone taps and concealed microphones. The system was expanded to other rooms within the White House and at Camp David. The taping system was confirmed by the Senate committee staff member, Donald Sanders, on July 13, 1973, in an interview with the White House aide, Alexander Butterfield, who is still alive, Alexander Butterfield. 3 days later, it was made public during the televised testimony of Butterfield when he was asked about the possibility of a White House taping system by the Senate counsel and also the actor Fred Thompson. Tape recorder, rather simple. Small reel-to-reel, got your buttons here, put them on. Basically, it's no big deal. It's a cheap tape recorder. But it's the tape recorder that put Nixon away. On July 26, 1973, the committee subpoenaed several White House tapes after the president had refused to surrender them. The accuracy of Dean's testimony was confirmed by the tapes. Well, that's Archibald Cox. He's brought in to prosecute the case against Nixon. The Harvard law professor, 1973 in May, and the former Solicitor General. Cox was asked to become the special prosecutor to investigate the Watergate break-in. He clashed with the White House over Nixon's refusal to release over 10 hours of secret Oval Office recordings, some of which implicated the president in the break-in. Let me say this about that. October 20th, 1973, Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon fired the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, accepted the resignations of the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, and the Deputy Attorney General, William Ruckelhaus. Basically, this is what happened. You know what? I ain't gonna do anything for Nixon. I'm gonna get out of here. So Richardson is out the door. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not firing these people. Same thing with Ruckelhaus. I'm not firing these people. Why should I fire them? On the night of October 20th, 1973, Nixon ordered Cox's firing. However, the person with the authority to dismiss Cox was the Attorney General Richardson. Didn't do it. He resigned. His deputy, Ruckelhaus, I ain't doing it. He resigned too. That left Robert Bork. Remember Robert Bork? Never made it to the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General is the highest ranking official in the Justice Department. Bork finally carried out Nixon's order and dismissed Cox. And there is Robert Bork. The reaction to the firing and resignation would force Nixon to appoint another special prosecutor to replace Cox. Congress would become more interested in what happened at the Watergate complex in June of 1972. Well, the next guy comes in. Cox on the left is gone. Leon Jaworski on the right is the new guy. On November 5th, 1973, Nixon appoints the new special prosecutor, Jaworski. He would secure a unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decision that forced Nixon to release secretly recorded tapes from the Oval Office in July 1974. And it is the beginning of the end for Dick Nixon. May 9th, the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee starts impeachment proceedings against Dick Nixon. The walls are caving in. So much so that, according to Henry Kissinger, Nixon is imbibing a little bit, and he's talking to the walls like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think? He's a mess. He's an absolute mess. On July 24th, in a unanimous ruling, the Supreme Court orders Nixon to release tape recordings. The decision came 2 months after the White House gave the House Judiciary Committee edited transcripts of Nixon's conversation, but did not turn over the actual tapes. Peter Rodino is a congressman from New Jersey. The vote to impeach. July 27th through the 30th, the impeachment process starts. The House Judiciary Committee passes 3 articles of impeachment against Nixon for obstructing justice, misuse of power, and contempt of Congress. The committee sent the impeachment to the floor for a full House vote. Well, the elders come in, the Republican elders, and led by Barry Goldwater there in the middle, who ran for president in 1964. And the elders have a heart-to-heart talk with Dick Nixon. They go to the White House on August 7th. Goldwater, the senator from Arizona, the U.S. House Minority Leader John Rhodes of Arizona, and the Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania. And they tell Nixon, hey, look, we're not telling you what to do. You're going to get impeached. You're going to get impeached. It's up to you. Well, Nixon is thinking about it. Obviously, in days of yore, where they had a better relationship, Goldwater and Nixon. Just the facts. Goldwater, Rhodes, and Scott did not try to persuade or urge Nixon to resign in their meeting in his working office at the old Executive Office building. But they told Dick that his support on the Hill had evaporated. And there is Dick Nixon. The end is near, and he's getting ready to announce his resignation. Nixon decided to resign. He gives a nationally televised address from the Oval Office on August 8th. How many of you watched Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In? Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In back in the day. What was the final thing in the show? Say goodnight, Dick. Goodnight, Dick. I've never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with the problems we face at home and abroad. He's out of there. The burglary did him in. I was 26 years old. I had hair back in those days. A long time ago, 1982, and that's Watergate. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. Gerald Ford would become the first president who was never elected either president or vice president. He replaced Vice President Spiro Agnew, who resigned in 1973 because of Agnew's corruption and kickbacks he had taken in Maryland as the governor. Say goodbye. And he's gone. Nixon goes off to California, never to be heard from again. That's not true. He was visible. He was very visible, and he walked around without Secret Service protection. He was around. And yeah, he does his thing with David Frost and others, but his real comeback is the baseball umpires dispute. Hello to the accidental President Gerald Ford. On September 8th, President Gerald Ford pardons former President Richard Nixon. Ford later defended this action before the House Judiciary Committee, explaining he wanted to end the national divisions created by the Watergate scandal. There were no other pardons. Watergate resulted in 69 government officials being charged, 48 found guilty. Ford was criticized for giving Nixon a full pardon, but the world went on. John Dean pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice before Watergate trial judge John Sirica on October 19, 1973, and he would serve 4 months in jail. Meanwhile, there were problems around the world, but this is kind of an interesting one. Portugal had been a mess throughout the 20th century, and there's another coup. It's called the Carnation Revolution. They have carnations in the barrel of their weaponry. On April the 25th, 200 military officers decided to take action and overthrow the dictator, Antonio Oliveira Salazar. The officers initially called themselves the Captains Movement, which they later renamed Armed Forces Movement to portray the image of brother support throughout the military. Their plan? Topple the dictatorship, fully restore civil liberties, hold elections for a constitutional assembly, to write a new constitution, abolish political police, find a diplomatic solution to colonial wars, particularly in Angola, which would become a proxy war in Africa between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. They didn't have troops there, but all their allies did. And turn power over to the democratically elected leaders. And that is the Carnation Revolution. Salazar's 40-year dictatorship collapsed. The coup was peaceful. There were no executions. Meanwhile, this guy gets himself in trouble. His name is Willy Brandt, and he was the Chancellor of West Germany, and he would be replaced by this guy, Helmut Schmidt. On May 6th, Willy Brandt, the Chancellor, resigns, replaced by Schmidt. On April 24th, there was a report of an East German spy working in Brandt's West Germany government, and that would lead to his downfall. Haile Selassie and his family had been in Ethiopia for centuries. And all of a sudden, he's gone. September 12th, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia is deposed by the Dervish, or the provincial military government of socialist Ethiopia. The new government was communist, Marxist, Leninist, and military junta. That brought the end to the Solomonic dynasty rule since 1270. They were in charge for 704 years, that family. The Ethiopian War, Civil War, would begin. So how many of you were in these lines, besides me? Gas lines. Nobody else? Nobody else was driving a car back in 1974? I'm not going to ask you if you were even or odd. I was odd. But I lived on the New Jersey-New York border, and I worked nights. So I would sneak in about 11:57. Didn't matter to me if it was even odd. I'm online. And they never questioned me. That was in Montvale, New Jersey. But those were the gas lines, and that was caused by the Yom Kippur War. OPEC started an oil embargo in 1973 at the outbreak of the Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War, Arab oil producers cut off the exports to the U.S., which brought soaring gas prices. Yeah, soaring. I remember it went up from like 33 cents a gallon to about 60 cents a gallon back in those days. Soaring gas prices, long lines at the filling station that contributed to a major economic downturn in the United States. The hope of a negotiated end to hostilities between Israel and Syria was enough to lift the embargo in March. Greece, it's a problem in Greece. Nixon was right. Problems all around the world. On July 23rd, after 7 years, the Greek military rule exits and democracy returns. The military government in Greece had collapsed, and the former prime minister, Constantine Karmelis, has been invited to return. Okay, you can tell me, how many of you were interested in Patty Hearst? How many of you watched Patty Hearst breathlessly because they kept breaking in? What's Patty Hearst doing today? I didn't care. I didn't care. I really didn't care. But people cared. Patty Hearst. Television. Hey, this is a great story for us. Television. Patty Hearst. Granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst. Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army in February. She would spend 19 months with her captors and join them in criminal acts soon after her kidnapping. Patty was kept in a closet, became a member of the SLA, changed her name to Tanya, adopted radical rhetoric, robbed a bank, went on the land. She was caught by the FBI in September of 1975. And to this day, I don't care. I really don't care about Patty Hearst. Baseball fans here. Any baseball fans? One. That's it? Just one baseball fan? Okay. Henry Aaron breaks Babe Ruth's home run record. It is April the 8th. The Atlanta Braves baseball player Hank Aaron hits his 715th home run of his career, breaking Babe Ruth's 39-year-old record. Remember, he's playing in Atlanta. It's still the Jim Crow South. The civil rights movement is done, but it's still, you have the hangover from the Jim Crow days. He succeeded even though he was getting hate mail and death threats, spewing outrage that a black man could supplant a white baseball icon. Henry Aaron kept all of the hate mail. He kept all of the hate mail to remind him what America was like while he was trying to break the record. It's my father-in-law, George Foreman. My father-in-law was a groupie. He used to go out with me when I had to cover stories, and unbeknownst to me, had somebody take a picture with all these athletes, like George Foreman, before the grill. On October 30th, the Rumble in the Jungle takes place in Kinshasa, Zaire. Muhammad Ali knocks out George Foreman in 8 rounds to regain the heavyweight title, which had been stripped from him in April 1967 without due process. Ali refused induction into the United States Armed Forces. And there's me, and there's Ali in 1985. Ali used a rope-a-dope style against Foreman. The rope-a-dope was essentially a bait and switch. Ali would feign weakness, allowing his opponents to attack him, ultimately punch themselves out. When they had nothing left to give, Ali would spring back to the attack and leave the worn-out opponents flat on their back. I hated gum now. How many of you chewed gum, and how many of you contributed to your dentist's yacht, or your periodontist's yacht, or bigger home, because you had chewing gum? Besides, I mean, all these Wrigley gums, when you used to chew juicy fruit, how long would that flavor last? 8 seconds? Or 10 seconds? Remember? You chew that, you know, oh, what happened to the taste? It's gone after 8 seconds. Wrigley Spearmint gum, same one. First barcode was Wrigley's gum. On June 26th, a supermarket cashier scans a multi-pack of juicy fruit gum across a barcode scanner in Troy, Ohio. It is the first product ever checked out by the Universal Product Code. How many of you solved the Rubik's Cube? You solved it? No? Did you solve it?
I tried.
You tried. The best way of doing it, pull it apart and put all the pieces back together, but you break the toy so it doesn't work anymore. The Rubik's Cube was invented in 1974. It was called Rubik's Cube, Magic Cube, a 3D combination puzzle, invented by the Hungarian sculptor and professor of architecture, Erno Rubik. It would be years before it was sold worldwide. It would be available in the United States in 1980. John Lennon's last public concert was Thanksgiving Eve in 1974 at Madison Square Garden. That was November 28th. His final performance, he joined Elton John on stage at Madison Square Garden in New York. Among the songs he sung was a song that he introduced as written by an old, estranged fiancé of mine named Paul. I saw her standing there. That song is now 63 years old. That girl, she was just 17, would be 80 years old now. Just 17. World Football League starts 1974, and this is an interesting story because it was a scam deal. In the first weeks, the WFL looked to be a success, but in Jacksonville, the Sharks' ownership admitted that 44,000 tickets were giveaways. Now, the Philadelphia Bell's ownership, the guy who was the lead owner was a guy by the name of Jack Kelly in Philadelphia. Does Jack Kelly mean anything to you? How about his sister, Grace Kelly? Grace Kelly. I got to know Jack Kelly. I never met Grace Kelly, but I got to know Jack Kelly back then. They had sold about 100,000 tickets for next to nothing. 6 games into the season, WFL franchises were in serious trouble. Marvin Gaye was one of the owners of Detroit Wheels. They were looking to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, the Orlando-based Florida Blazers to Atlanta. The IRS allowed the Birmingham Americans team, whose owners had owed the federal government as much as $237,000 in back taxes, to play in the World Football League Championship game against the Florida Blazers at Birmingham's Legion Field in return for a share of the gate. This is where it gets real interesting. Here is the game being played, and sheriff's marshals are there. After the game, sheriffs seized Blazers equipment. The Americans and Blazers players had not been paid in weeks, but played the game. They were convinced to stay on the field by the promise of playoff money and championship rings. Things got so bad, one player in Orlando complained he didn't have money to buy toilet paper. The community decided to help him out and sent him all kinds of rolls of toilet paper. Lucille Ball says goodbye. After almost 23 consecutive years on TV, Lucy, by the way, Lucy's birthday is on August 6th, 5 days away. Lucy was born in 1911, which means that she would be 113 years old now. Can you believe that Lucy was born 113 years ago? Those shows are still on TV. Lucille Ball decides to give up weekly television. She advised CBS that she would discontinue her weekly series, Here's Lucy. Now, she is the mother of Star Trek. Anybody here Star Trek fans? You're a Star Trek. You like all the things I keep talking about. Well, without Lucy, there's no Star Trek. She put up the money for the pilot for Star Trek, and then another pilot. It was finally put on, and Lucy, nobody wanted to put Star Trek on except for Lucy. Who was right and who was wrong?
Lucy was right.
Lucy was right. She was the artistic head of Desilu, then owned the studio, first for a woman. She greenlighted Star Trek against everybody's wishes. I Love Lucy is still making Paramount money, despite that it hasn't been on since May 6, 1957, in first run episodes. The show today brings in $20 million. $20 million, the old I Love Lucy shows, and there hasn't been a show made in 67 years. Lucy would return to TV on ABC in September 1986. Life with Lucy. It was a total failure. Just 8 of the 13 episodes ABC ordered were shown. The other 5 were so bad, ABC said we can't put them on. The Sears Tower in Chicago becomes the biggest building in the world. And that is from Lake Michigan, that picture. Sears Tower in Chicago becomes the world's tallest building, 108 stories, 1,451-foot skyscraper. The tower has 108 stories, counted by standard methods, though the building's owners count the main roof as 109 and the mechanical penthouse as 110. After completion in 1974, it surpassed the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan to become the tallest building in the world. Any Stephen King fans? No Stephen King fans? You don't like the horror books? It's okay, neither do I. But anyway, Stephen King becomes a big deal in 1974. He's 26 years old, and he published his debut novel, Carrie, during April. Well, it was actually the fourth novel he had written, but the first to be published. The story focuses on a bullied and sheltered teenager who discovers she has telekinetic powers, ultimately using her powers to seek revenge. The novel is created with revitalizing the horror genre. Well, let's take a look back at what happened 50 years ago. There's Gerald Ford. He became the President of the United States. Nixon would go into exile. Politically, he would return in 1985 after mediating a labor dispute between Major League Baseball owners and umpires. He gave the umpires a 40% raise. And I got to know him a little bit. Call me Dick. Ford pardoned Nixon. Ford would lose his presidential election bid to Jimmy Carter in 1976. It was his first presidential campaign. Hank Aaron ended up hitting 755 home runs, a record that was eclipsed by Barry Bonds, who hit 762, but Bonds was accused of using steroids. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in the business, although she did not want to be remembered that way for her legacy. She wanted to be remembered just as an actress. In late 1989, the Berlin Wall started to come down in talks between East German and West German officials, eventually joined by bureaucrats from the United States, Great Britain, France, and the USSR began to explore the possibility of the Germany's reuniting. And they do on October 3rd, 1990, and Helmut Kohl would be the first chancellor of the reunited Germany. World Football League folded in 1975. On September 18th, 1975, Patty Hearst was captured by the FBI, tried and convicted in March 1976 for bank robbery and felonious use of firearms. Sentenced to 7 years in prison, she was released in February 1979 after President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. How many of you have the Foreman Grill or had the Foreman Grill? The Foreman Grill. The grill.
Foreman Grill.
Yeah, how many of you had it? Is it good?
I did.
Did you like it?
I had it.
You had it. Did it cook well?
I did.
It did. Here we go. George Foreman, the Foreman Grill. Both Ali and Foreman are beloved boxing figures. Ali for his stance against the Vietnam War and his shenanigans in and out of the ring. Foreman became a lovable old man fighting and a commercial pitchman. John Lennon never performed in the arena or stadium again, was gunned down on December 8, 1980. The Derg in Ethiopia fell in 1991. The headquarters of the African Union is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ethiopia makes the claim of being the diplomatic capital of Africa. The Ethiopian government has played an active role in attempting to resolve conflicts in neighboring Somalia and South Sudan. And that there was Portugal. The first free election was held in Portugal, April 25th, 1975, to write a new constitution, replacing the constitution of 1933. Another election was held in 1976, and the first constitutional government, led by center-left socialist Mario Soares, took office. Woodward and Bernstein were reporting on Donald Trump's impeachments and arrests 5 decades after Watergate. Mark Felt was identified as Deep Throat in 2005. He was a former Federal Bureau of Investigation Associate Director. He wanted to be the FBI Director, never got it. Robert Bork became a cartoon character in The Simpsons. On October 23rd, 1987, the United States the Senate rejected Robert Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court by a roll call vote of 58-42 because of his role in Watergate. On the TV show, The Simpsons, Judge Roy Snyder's character is based on Horn. Stephen King's books have sold more than 350 million copies. How many of you used to go to Sears? Sears. How many of you went to Sears? Store closing. This is up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario when I was there. The Sears Tower serves as the headquarters of the retail company Sears from 1974 to 1994. Sears sold the tower in 1994, vacated it by 1995, but they retained the naming rights until 2003. It's now known as the Willis Tower. Sears, once the largest retailer in the United States, barely exists. As of May 2023, there were just 11 stores still operating. Any questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so what happened to Roebuck?
To what?
What happened to Roebuck?
Sears Roebuck.
Oh, Roebuck, he was gone many, many years earlier. Many years